Ukraine last night bombards Moscow with one of the biggest drone attacks of the war. And you said you had some numbers for me, Matt?
Yeah, I heard.
You knew happened.
I did via Al Jazeera. I heard 1,000 drones were used by Ukraine against Russia. So if we go back about a year or so, I think there's a lot of talk about how Russia was building the capacity to fire 1,000 drones at Ukraine. Now, I think that conversation was in the sense of they'd be able to do it daily or almost daily. But here you have Ukraine firing 1,000 drones at Russia. And this follows previous iterations of Ukrainian attacks on Russia, where the Ukrainians fired
Look
hundreds.
at this. This is Moscow.
Right?
That's Moscow.
Yeah. This is, now whether or not that really does anything, but even too, watching that, that's a successful hit on a drone.
Yeah.
But if you're like, if I live in Moscow, I'm thinking, shit, I might have been living
What
under
the hell? Yeah.
Yeah. Or that my kids might have been at basketball practice there or something like that, or whatever they play in Moscow, hockey practice, or whatever, but it is, these are dramatic.
Look at this. This is an oil refinery lid. Look at it blown up in the air. Look at that.
Right. So that's incredible. And that's been watched how many times on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube, right? That's spectacular.
Yes.
Right. The drama of it, the spectacle of it.
And here's an apartment building. So it wasn't just the oil refineries. Right? They hit civilian territory also.
Right. Now, as we know, this likely won't have an impact on the Russians. It might cause some people to be, more cautious, nervous. But overall, airstrikes usually don't change the minds of the populations that are being struck. If anything, it puts pressure on the government to end the war quicker. In this sense, because a lot of the pressure on Vladimir Putin has been, how come this war is still going on?
Well,
why aren't you fighting this war hard enough?
Well, what's the straw that breaks the back of Putin? I'm curious. Here's Lavrov. I looked for commentary from Putin, and I didn't see any. There might be some that's not out now, but there wasn't any at the time of the show here. But let me show you what Lavrov is saying.
Я давно уже убежден, что слов недостаточно. Не случайно президент объявил какое-то время назад, после очередной выходки киевского террориста, о том, что мы будем теперь проводить массированные групповые удары на регулярной основе, по целям, от состояния которых напрямую зависит боеспособность вооруженных сил Украины. Это задача, поставленная Верховным Главнокомандующим. Наши вооруженные силы выполняют ее и будут ее выполнять.
Matt, strong and measured words, but it still seems like it's almost like Groundhog Day to them. I don't understand why there isn't more pushback.
We're not really sure how effective these strikes are in terms of actually hurting the Russians industrially and economically. Over the last couple of years, we've seen reports come out, Russian, refineries are down 70% or whatever the numbers are. And then a couple months later, we'll see a correction to that. And no, it's actually only 3 or 4%. We saw Russia this past May, leading up to May, reports that these drones were shutting off Russian exports. And then in May, we learned that Russia had exported more oil in terms of revenue than they had at any point in the last 4.5 years. Mm-hmm. We really don't have an idea. What I can understand about something like that is it looks spectacular.
Right, exactly.
But that's it's a holding
visuals.
Take. The visuals are incredible, but in the reality, it's a holding take, and they're easy to replace. So the actual loss isn't that great. Now, where it's big, of course, is what puts pressure on the Russian government, but puts pressure on the Russian government in the wrong way, not to capitulate, not to make peace, not to negotiate, but to win the war. The other way, it's also geared towards, there's also the hope that it is having its effect on Russia's economy and on its industry. But the other side of it then is that it provides support to the Ukrainian people. Look, we're giving it to them as good as we're getting it. And I think probably highest on the list here for the Ukrainians is that it provides motivation. It provides inspiration. It's meant to reinforce European support as well as American support. The idea being, look at these Ukrainians, look at them fighting.
Oh,
I'm sure
yeah.
Kaya Kallas sent that to everyone on her contact
Oh,
list.
right. The press in favor of Ukraine's been tremendous.
Right, exactly. And so as we see here in the United States, where you had a discharge petition successful in the House of Representatives for aid to Ukraine. And for people who aren't familiar with the discharge petition, when the American Speaker of the House of Representatives doesn't want a bill to come forward onto the floor to be voted upon, and it's the Speaker who determines what comes to the floor eventually, the members of the House of Representatives can put forward a discharge petition, which with a simple majority, they can force the Speaker to put a bill forward. And you had this happen with, this is what Ro Khanna and Thomas Massie did with the Epstein files. That's
right.
Right. And so discharge petition was actually done for aid to Ukraine, and it passed. Now, I don't think that bill has gotten to the floor yet. And it was kind of minor, about 1.7 billion, if I recall correctly, around there, 1.5 billion. So it wasn't a big bill, but there is a bill in Congress right now for $17 billion in aid. It will likely pass, and it will then probably get vetoed by the president. But, if you read the European press this week ahead of the G7, Ukraine was supposed to be the big topic. It got upended by this MOU,
right.
But this is where they thought that the Americans were going to start to make concessions. And Trump did say a few things that give the Europeans optimism. He didn't shut it down. Right. He was supposed to meet with Zelensky. I haven't seen anything from that.
He said they had a good conversation.
Yeah. And he's been more critical of Russia here. He described the Russians as being the offensive, or he said something like that to make it. The tone was, to me, he's putting the onus on the Russians now. This is their war. They started it, that type of thing. So is Donald Trump, not coming back to it, but it's going to be more open to it, and this is going to be something he's not going to fight on, or we'll see. But certainly for the Ukrainians and the Europeans, they have a light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. They believe that while the Democratic Party in the U.S. is going to do everything it can not to win in November, it's amazing, but it really is. It's amazing, it's just amazing. But this dog Ursus could run for Congress and should be able to beat the Republicans. But the Democrats will find a way not to do it. I think the idea being is that in 2028, if the Democrats can take back the White House, the United States will come back in the war. And look, 2028, January 2029. It's only 2.5 years away from now.
Yeah.
Right. We're getting close. And so I think these types of videos, to tie us all back in, these types of spectacular attacks, or go back a couple weeks ago when you had those black smoke clouds floating over the St. Petersburg Economic Forum.
Right.
It's a type of morale boost. That is the type of propaganda, the information warfare that the Ukrainians and the Europeans are counting on to continue this war, to continue support for the war in the West, right? And to eventually provide the rationale for an American reentry into the war, if not with the next Congress somehow, which again, I think that's unlikely, even with Trump maybe getting softer, but with certainly a Democratic president in 2020, in January 2029.
It's going to be fascinating, whatever happens, right? It's going to be just quite a bit of drama going in all directions.
Right. And I don't see any reason, and this is my fear is that the escalation we see continues. I mean, certainly if I was to talk to the Russians, my thing would be, why do you allow the trains still to run? How is it possible for supplies to get into Ukraine at all? How come you haven't targeted those yet? And I know they do target, there is stuff that's hit, but
right.
Yeah. But just overall, not that I want to see that happen.
No, I know you're
just
saying.
Out of curiosity, how come you haven't done this? And I understand the special military operation and all that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Matt, that's always been my question. Putin, his tepidness over the course of time. I understand, he, like you said, that, it's a SMO. But my gosh, there's been a lot of destruction that could have been, short-circuited.
I had someone, critical of me, because I was, I'm not supportive of the Russians here, and
right.
I'm very critical of how they've conducted this war and everything, and and I don't believe the fact that they gained territory the size of Rhode Island in the past 12 months to be part of the master plan, particularly when the goal is the territorial conquest, the Donbass. I understand the attrition and all, I get that, but someone said, what would you want to see the Russians do? Like, I don't know, win the war, maybe? It's been 4.5 years. Yeah. And this is the pressure that's on Putin. The Russians, are saying, most of the criticism on him is not from those like, hey, end the war. It's a stalemate. It's not going anywhere. This is counterproductive. You made your point. Let's just end this thing. No, it's people who are saying it only took us 4 years to beat the Nazis. Right. And it's taken us 4.5. And here we are still in the Donbass. It's not like we're about to march on Odessa next week or anything like that.
Right.
So I think just from an objective position, right, the stuff that you and I do here, looking at this stuff, the scratching of our heads and saying, how come the Russians haven't, made it impossible to resupply the Ukrainians? And there's explanations, and I certainly have always understood the Russians have no interest in going further west than the Donbass. That's not their goal, not their intentions, not their plans, I understand other things too, but some of it just, but where it goes, the fear I have, we share this idea of you continue to escalate, you continue to push, and there are many in both Kyiv and throughout Europe that want to see the Russians provoked into a greater response, in the hope that escalation then leads to the inevitable entry of the Europeans into the war, which would then pull the Americans in as well, right? Through some type of NATO Article 5 mechanism, which of course doesn't necessarily apply, but or might not apply, but certainly I think that's the hope of a lot. I'm sure Kalakalis and Ursula von der Leyen go to bed at night and they close their eyes, and this is what they think about, these types of things. Like, how do we, how do we get the Americans back in? How do we get the Europeans, even more united? How do we make this into a greater, that's tough, because the Europeans have been this has been such a like the guys in Duran call Project Ukraine. This has been such a project, right? It really has been over the decades. So, yeah.
I wouldn't know how to interpret Kalasi any other way than what you just described also.
Right. It's funny. I don't know if you saw that the Israeli foreign minister, Gideon Sa'ar, just blacklisted her, I guess, or something.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He accused her of leveling a blood libel against Israel. Just something like this is, I think, back to Israel quick, with that desperation and that lashing out, they're going to lash out even at some of their best friends. Yeah. And Kallis and the European Union have been very supportive of Israel. Sometimes they issue a very modest rebuke of Israel, but mostly the European Union has been, reliable for Israel. Kallis, of course, being one of those, right?
Yeah.
But now I think in their desperation, you may have the Israelis lashing out at everybody who even suggests anything other than full
unity.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, man. Quite something. Well, listen, I want to point everybody to Matt's Substack right here, Thoughts on War and Peace. And right there, you can see where you can go get it. And Matt, you've got video and text also, right? You do a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. And I'm pretty active on the Notes, which is Substack's version of X. So I'll post daily content there as well. And then my actual email posts, usually once every 2 weeks, I'll send something out.
Well, thanks, man. I always love having you on. I love having your insights. And we'll see you soon, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary.
We don't have sponsors because we hate to hit you over the head with ads. I don't like them. So show a little love back. Subscribe, like, and send this to somebody you care about.